Over 46% of young South Africans stand locked out of the formal national economy, trapped in a deepening socio-economic crisis. An entire generation remains abandoned between grand parliamentary rhetoric from the podium and political rallies, utterly detached from the harsh realities of daily survival. The tectonic shift in democratic discourse erupted when independent digital media unpicked the economic freedom fighters' own official manifesto live on air, directly confronting party doctrine with the lived experience of millions of unemployed citizens. When political authority attempts to demand unquestioned loyalty while concealing its own commercial contradictions, the populist illusion fractures under public scrutiny. If power changes hands, but not structure, has anything really changed? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a pivotal moment in contemporary political history. If this story resonates with your sense of justice, show your support with a like, a comment, or a subscription. It keeps the truth alive. The confrontation between Julius Malema, the commander-in-chief of the economic freedom fighters, and MacG, the founder of the independent digital broadcast Podcast and Chill, represents far more than a passing media feud. It marks a fundamental rupture in how political authority interacts with public scrutiny in contemporary South Africa. At a major national press conference held in August 2026, Julius Malema mounted an uncompromising assault against independent digital platforms, explicitly targeting MacG and accusing his show of systematically depoliticizing the nation's youth. The party leader alleged that digital commentary was actively diluting revolutionary consciousness, encouraging superficial social culture, and making excessive alcohol consumption fashionable among millions of impressionable young citizens. However, this stern moral sermon, delivered from the political pulpit, collapsed almost immediately under the weight of its own internal contradictions. Within hours of the press conference, MacG and his broadcast team delivered a devastating counterstrike that resonated throughout the political landscape. The creators highlighted long-standing allegations that Julius Malema himself maintained commercial interests in a prominent high-end nightclub situated within the Limpopo province. For a national leader who routinely chastises unemployed youth for succumbing to escapism and substance misuse, the existence of a personal commercial interest in the nightlife industry presented a profound moral paradox. It forced citizens to ask a fundamental question: how can a political leader publicly condemn the youth for consuming alcohol while privately extracting profit from the very establishment that sells it? This sharp divergence between public rhetoric and private enterprise reveals the growing disconnect surrounding those who seek to maintain their position at the seat of power. It exposes a political culture that demands rigid moral compliance from ordinary working-class citizens while granting quiet exemptions to its own elite. To understand the full gravity of this political shift, one must remember that in July 2022, Julius Malema sat voluntarily in that very same podcast studio as an invited guest. At that time, when the platform's massive audience offered direct access to millions of young voters before a major national election, the show was embraced as a vital democratic space. Yet 4 years later, the moment independent podcasters refused to function as party mouthpieces and dared to interrogate official policies, the platform was instantly reclassified as a hostile political opponent. The retaliatory wave from the party apparatus was swift, aggressive, and highly orchestrated. Loyal party members self-styled as the fighters inundated digital spaces with demands for a total boycott, calling upon their claimed membership of over 1 million citizens to immediately unsubscribe from the channel. Party partisans argued that questioning the commander-in-chief constituted a direct betrayal of the liberation movement. Yet, this desperate campaign for enforced silence only served to expose a far deeper vulnerability within the party structure. The leadership's inability to tolerate independent questioning revealed an organization struggling to defend its moral authority in an era of unfiltered digital transparency. Rather than subduing the public, this aggressive attempt at political intimidation sparked an unprecedented wave of national scrutiny. Across townships, urban centers, and online forums, ordinary South Africans began to recognize that the leadership's hostility towards independent digital commentators was not rooted in genuine revolutionary principle, but in a desperate attempt to protect party doctrine from public accountability. When political authority attempts to police independent thought while remaining silent on its own commercial realities, its credibility begins to erode at the foundational level. Yet, as political leaders attempted to enforce compliance through public condemnation, they overlooked a fatal vulnerability. The broadcast had already exposed the central contradiction within their own movement. The flashpoint of this confrontation reached its absolute zenith when MacG and his co-hosts took an unprecedented step on independent digital radio. They opened the official founding documents of the economic freedom fighters and read them aloud to millions of listeners. Rather than engaging in personal slurs or unverified rumors, the broadcast systematically examined the party's official position on the EFF immigration policy alongside its celebrated 7 cardinal pillars. For years, the party leadership had presented these pillars as untouchable revolutionary scripture, designed to mobilize the masses through Pan-African solidarity. However, when those very words were transmitted directly into the living rooms, vehicles, and smartphones of ordinary citizens without party commentary or ideological curation, the public reaction was immediate and explosive. The text revealed a stark, unbridgeable divide between political doctrine and the lived reality of the populace. At a time when officially recorded youth unemployment exceeds 46% and broader economic exclusion impacts over 60% of young citizens, the party's insistence on completely open borders and unrestricted regional integration struck millions of struggling workers as profoundly detached from their daily hardship. In communities crippled by failing infrastructure, overcrowded public hospitals, and escalating violent crime, citizens found themselves asking why a party claiming to represent the working class appeared to prioritize regional ideological ambitions over domestic stability. The podcasters did not alter the text. They merely provided a mirror to the policy, allowing the electorate to judge its contents for themselves. This pivotal moment illuminated the timeless struggle between justice versus power. For decades, established political organizations had relied on controlled narrative channels to shield their internal contradictions from critical examination. When independent commentators laid bare the exact phrasing of the party's manifesto, they proved that true democratic engagement requires total transparency rather than uncritical worship of political figures. What the public demanded was clear, not reform, not rhetoric, accountability. By placing the party's official promises alongside the harsh realities of township life, the broadcast demonstrated that no political movement, regardless of its revolutionary heritage, should remain immune from public scrutiny. The reaction from the party apparatus and its devoted online activists was immediate, ferocious, and chaotic. On social media platforms and digital forums, loyal partisans launched an aggressive offensive, accusing MacG and allied commentators like Penuel of sabotaging the liberation movement. Rather than addressing the specific policy concerns raised by ordinary citizens, party defenders resorted to reflexively labeling critics as xenophobic, reactionary, or tribalist. This fierce pushback exposed a profound psychological crisis within the party's rank and file, a collective inability to confront their commander-in-chief on policies that were visibly eroding the party's electoral standing across key provinces. Instead of demanding that Julius Malema re-evaluate a policy framework clearly out of step with the working-class party loyalists, directed their fury entirely at the messengers who dared to read the document. This defensive meltdown highlighted a broader pattern of political denial. When political movements insulate their leadership from constructive criticism, they transform genuine democratic debate into rigid dogma. The panic at party headquarters was not caused by external falsehoods, but by the undeniable truth contained within their own official literature. What began as a clash between a politician and a podcaster quickly escalated into an existential challenge, exposing a widening rift between party elite and the street. The profound evolution of the South African electorate leading into the local government elections in 2026 marks a decisive break from the era of old-world political patronage. For decades, legacy political parties maintained their grip on power by relying on well-worn electioneering tactics, filling stadiums with imported crowds, distributing branded T-shirts, and handing out food parcels to impoverished voters. Yet, for a 22-year-old citizen standing among the millions of unemployed youth, these superficial offerings no longer command loyalty or respect. What the rising generation demands is not a temporary gift from a political podium, but structural empowerment, specifically universal digital access, affordable internet connectivity, and the economic tools required to compete in the modern global economy. The intense public discourse ignited by the clash between Julius Malema MacG illuminated a glaring failure across the nation's political landscape. While traditional political organizations spend hundreds of millions of rands renting buses and filling arenas to project an illusion of total dominance, they have systematically neglected the foundational infrastructure that young people actually require to escape poverty. Independent digital platforms have exposed how political elites maintain their authority precisely by restricting the free flow of uncurated information. When podcasters and digital commentators champion free public Wi-Fi across townships, they are advocating for real economic sovereignty. Access to the internet allows young citizens to launch independent broadcasts, trade in digital marketplaces, harness artificial intelligence for autonomous enterprises, and gain knowledge without political filtering. When political leaders attempt to vilify independent digital platforms, they unwittingly expose their deepest institutional fear, an educated, digitally empowered electorate that no longer requires political gatekeepers. By dismissing independent commentators as agents of depoliticization, legacy parties reveal that their definition of political engagement is limited to uncritical obedience. However, when ordinary citizens gain the tools to analyze government spending, scrutinize policy manifestos, and organize outside party structures, the traditional mechanisms of political control begin to dismantle themselves. Pause for a moment and share with us where you are watching this video. Is it from Africa, Europe, or the Americas? Tell us in the comments below. South African Dynamics wants to thank you personally and send a heartfelt wish across the distance. May freedom and dignity walk beside you wherever you are. Let the comments be not just words, but bridges of solidarity. The socio-political consequences of this digital awakening are particularly devastating for movements that rely on emotional populism rather than practical governance. When political leaders demand that unemployed citizens embrace abstract regional doctrines while ignoring daily insecurity, skyrocketing crime, and broken municipal services, the social contract ruptures completely. Citizens across the country are declaring that national solidarity cannot be built on the suffering of its own people. The attempt by political partisans to brand working-class voters as xenophobic simply for demanding effective border management and public safety has alienated the very communities that once formed the backbone of the liberation movement. This profound shift raises a vital question for the future of democratic governance in the digital age. Can political movements in the modern era survive when they lose the trust of the digitally empowered youth? When political organizations choose to attack independent voices rather than reforming their own flawed policies, they do not silence the demand for change. They merely accelerate their own electoral obsolescence. The era of trading votes for empty promises has officially ended, replaced by an uncompromising demand for tangible results and institutional integrity. As the digital electorate rejects political patronization, the institutional shockwaves have begun to spill across national boundaries, capturing global attention. The structural transformation unfolding within South African media has caught the immediate attention of international observers, foreign diplomatic missions, and the global African diaspora. From policy institutes in Washington and London to regional bodies across the African Union, analysts are observing how the traditional architecture of political influence is crumbling under the weight of digital democratization. For decades, the political establishment maintained an iron grip over public consciousness through legacy broadcasting channels, most notably the state-owned South African Broadcasting Corporation, supplemented by heavily funded public relations campaigns backed by corporate oligarchs. Whether through corporate campaign financing or state-controlled newsrooms, the ruling elite held a virtual monopoly over the national narrative. However, the rapid emergence of independent digital creators has permanently shattered this historical monopoly, demonstrating to the international community that African civil society can no longer be contained by curated state propaganda. This global shift in media consumption has elevated the MacG Podcast Controversy into a focal point of international discussions regarding media freedom and political accountability in developing democracies. Foreign analysts and civil society organizations recognize that this clash is not merely a localized feud, but a case study in how digital platforms provide an unfiltered voice to marginalized populations. For members of the African diaspora, who have long observed continental politics from afar, the willingness of young South Africans to challenge entrenched political dogmas marks a profound moment of democratic maturity. This battle highlights the fundamental tension between silence versus voice, where established political parties once counted on public passivity and enforced ideological compliance. The new digital landscape demands total transparency. The public is no longer interested in curated political spin or artificial party consensus. What they insist upon is simple: not silence, not noise, truth. International financial institutions and foreign political observers are also taking note of the diminishing returns on traditional political campaign expenditure. Historically, political parties could secure public support by deploying tens of millions of rands to fill vast stadiums, print mass marketing materials, and distribute temporary patronage. Today, a simple digital broadcast operating with minimal equipment can command an audience that rivals or exceeds any stadium rally, delivering unvarnished analysis directly to millions of voters. Foreign investors and diplomatic observers recognize that the era of managing political risk through elite deal-making is swiftly drawing to a close. As populist movements find themselves unable to censor independent digital commentators or control algorithmic distribution, their ability to dictate public policy from closed boardrooms is visibly slipping away. When state control over the narrative dissolves, political figures are left with only one remaining defense: facing the unvarnished truth at the ballot box. The road ahead for South Africa, as it approaches the critical local government elections in 2026, requires a fundamental recalibration of its democratic commitments. For over 3 decades, the nation has navigated a long and arduous transition away from its oppressive historical past, yet the material promise of true liberation remains frustratingly incomplete for millions who continue to endure systemic poverty and economic exclusion. As legacy political movements attempt to retain their grip on power by repeatedly leveraging historical memory, the rising generation is decisively casting off the shadow of unquestioned party loyalty. Citizens across every province are refusing to remain trapped in the shadow of elite compromise, administrative incompetence, or revolutionary rhetoric that yields no tangible progress for working families. The true path to sustainable national renewal lies not in dramatic stadium rallies or emotional populism, but in constructing transparent institutions, enforcing rigorous anti-corruption standards, and fostering economic self-reliance that guarantees personal dignity for every worker. The fundamental challenge facing future political leaders is reconciling regional solidarity with national economic security and social stability. True sovereignty cannot exist when a nation fails to secure its domestic borders, protect its vulnerable labor force, or provide functional municipal services to its townships. The future demands a clear, pragmatic roadmap that aligns realistic economic growth with structural reform, one that prioritizes vital infrastructure investment, expands universal digital connectivity, and creates genuine industrial pathways for youth employment. As independent digital platforms continue to dismantle traditional political gatekeeping, the electorate is acquiring the precise analytical tools necessary to hold their elected representatives directly accountable. This profound democratic awakening signals that emotional populism devoid of practical governance is no longer politically viable in a modern constitutional state. The future ultimately belongs to a political culture grounded in truth, institutional integrity, and an unyielding commitment to the welfare of ordinary citizens. As we prepare to end, remember this is not the end of the road, but a seed planted in the soil of your heart. Every story of dignity and sovereignty is part of a harvest that lies ahead. If you want to see that harvest grow, subscribe to South African Dynamics. Let this channel be the road we walk together, the light we carry forward. Join us and stand ready for the next chapter that is already waiting to be written. Navigating this uncharted political landscape will test the resilience of South Africa's constitutional democracy as never before. As old political structures crumble under the weight of public scrutiny, a new paradigm of popular sovereignty is taking root across every township and suburb. The era of unquestioned political authority has closed. The future now belongs to those who dare to ask the unanswered questions. The fierce ideological confrontation involving Julius Malema MacG is far more than a passing media headline or a brief digital feud. It represents an unprecedented turning point in South Africa's constitutional journey towards real political accountability. Through the historic upheaval surrounding the MacG podcast controversy, millions of ordinary citizens have witnessed the transformative power of independent digital broadcasting to challenge entrenched political dogmas, dissect party manifestos, and expose the stark contradictions between elite rhetoric and everyday economic survival. As the nation moves decisively towards its pivotal local government elections in 2026, the passionate national debate sparked by Julius Malema MacG serves as an enduring reminder that political authority is neither absolute nor immune from public scrutiny. When an empowered populace reclaims its critical awareness, no political movement, regardless of its historical credentials or revolutionary symbolism, can remain insulated behind populist slogans. True sovereignty does not belong to party headquarters or career politicians claiming the seat of power. It resides entirely within the informed, courageous, and sovereign voice of the people. This democratic awakening signals that the era of uncritical party allegiance has drawn to a permanent close, replaced by an uncompromising demand for institutional integrity, economic dignity, and transparent leadership across every sphere of society. If a nation has the vote, but not the voice, is it truly a democracy? The ongoing struggle for truth and genuine representation is no longer dictated from political podiums, but crafted daily by citizens who refuse to be silenced, ensuring that the promise of a sovereign and dignified future remains firmly within their hands.